All right. So, yeah, you sent over some info about this Warren Barnes murder, and it sounds like a really intense case.
Yeah, it really shook up Grand Junction, Colorado.
So we're going to do a deep dive into it. And I got to say, there's just a ton of audio on this one.
Oh yeah.
Like we have 911 calls, body cam footage, the interrogation tapes.
It's really unusual to have access to so much audio, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like we're right there with them as all this is going down.
It is. It really gives you a much more visceral sense of the case than you usually get.
And as we go through it all, you'll see how this thing starts out seeming pretty straightforward,
Right.
car in the river, but it gets really complicated and dark really quickly.
Yeah. There's a lot of premeditation, it looks like, and then there are the mental health questions.
Yeah, and, a community trying to cope with losing someone they cared about.
Yeah.
So let's start with that car in the river. Okay, so we have Brian Kohi Jr., he's 19,
Okay.
drives his car right into the Colorado River at the Blue Heron boat ramp.
Hmm.
At first, it seemed like just an accident. Maybe some teenager being reckless or something.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Happens all the time, right?
Mm.
But what makes this one different is that there was this little detail the officer noticed.
Oh, right.
Blood.
Mm,
Yeah, there was blood on the bumper of the car, and that obviously changed things.
for sure.
Suddenly it wasn't just some kid who drove into the river, it was potentially a crime scene.
Right.
So this is where we get our first audio clip.
Okay.
It's a call from Brian's mother. To him, she'd heard about the blood and she's worried.
I bet.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
here's the clip.
Okay.
You can really hear the concern in her voice, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's got to be every parent's worst nightmare.
Totally.
But, I mean, Brian insists he's fine, but that blood is obviously a huge red flag.
For everyone, yeah. And then it gets even worse.
Mm.
Yeah, so Brian's dad starts looking through the car
Yeah.
and he finds a wallet.
Uh,
And it's not Brian's. It belongs to a man named Warren Barnes. So now you've got blood and a stranger's wallet.
yeah. This is not looking good.
No, and it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the next day, Brian's mother, Mrs. Kohi, she finds something absolutely horrific in Brian's closet.
Whoa.
And she calls 911. You're going to want to brace yourself for this one. It's a tough listen. That terror in her voice just sends chills down your spine, doesn't it?
Definitely. It just hits you right in the gut.
Yeah, and it's even crazier when you think about it.
What's that?
She was running a daycare out of her house.
Oh, gosh. So there were kids there.
Yeah, kids in the house while this horrifying thing was hidden in the closet.
Wow. That's just, I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So what happened when the police got there?
Well, they get there, and Brian is just totally calm.
Really?
Yeah, like super detached, like none of it's even phasing him.
Mm.
And he just comes right out and confesses.
Wow. Just like that.
Yeah, right there in the driveway. The officer's body cam caught the whole thing. It's really eerie how calm he is.
I bet. I mean, you'd think that. Huh? I mean, I don't even know what I'd expect, but not that.
Yeah, and this is where things take an even darker turn.
How so?
Because Brian doesn't just confess.
Yeah.
He gives them all these details, like super specific, horrifying details about everything.
Like what?
Well, remember he said something about something being under this bridge in the body cam footage?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Well, that's where he killed Warren Barnes.
Oh, wow.
And the reason he did it is, well, it's pretty messed up, maybe the most messed up part of this whole thing.
Okay, let's hear it. So tell me about Brian's confession. You mentioned it was really detailed.
Yeah, he really goes all in. He actually uses a whiteboard, like, like a teacher would.
Oh, well, I poured it.
Yeah, to like draw out exactly what happened, like step by step. It's super creepy.
I can only imagine, so methodical, so planned out.
Exactly. And he's so calm the whole time, just matter-of-factly explaining this brutal murder.
Wow, that's unsettling. You said premeditation earlier, and this just seems to reinforce that, you know?
For sure. It's not like some crime of passion or anything. This was definitely thought out in advance.
So he chose Warren Barnes on purpose.
Yeah, it wasn't random at all.
Hmm.
He says he wanted to kill someone who he thought wouldn't be missed, and so he went after a homeless person.
Because he thought no one would notice.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
He specifically targeted Warren because he was homeless, someone he saw as, invisible to society.
That's chilling. I mean, it's predatory behavior, right? This idea of choosing someone based on their vulnerability, it's a huge red flag.
Absolutely, and it makes you question his mental state even more.
Right. Was he really detached from reality, or was this all just a cold calculation?
Exactly, and then you hear him describing the actual murder. It's rough, really hard to listen to.
Yeah, I bet.
We do have clips of it, but fair warning, they're pretty graphic.
Okay, I'm ready.
It's crazy. There's just no emotion in his voice at all. He's talking about stabbing Warren, about Warren begging for his life, just no remorse, no empathy, nothing.
Wow.
And he even says he was growling, like making animal noises during the attack. It's just bizarre.
So disturbing. I mean, on the one hand, you could interpret that as a sign of psychosis, right? Like a total break with reality.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you could see it as a way to dehumanize Warren, to make
Yeah.
it easier for him to do what he was doing.
That's a good point, like a coping mechanism or something.
Yeah.
And it gets even worse. He talks about mutilating the body. After the murder, he cut off Warren's head and hands.
Oh my God, that's taking it to a whole other level. It's like something out of a horror movie.
Right. I mean, that seems to point towards a deeper psychological issue, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, taking trophies from a victim, that's usually about power and control, like asserting dominance over the victim, even after death. It's a pretty common thing with serial killers.
And that's something else Brian talked about. He was obsessed with serial killers.
Really?
Oh, yeah, like Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, those were his idols.
Wow, that's pretty telling.
He even researched fatal neck wounds online before the attack.
See, that's the kind of thing the prosecution is going to jump on,
To prove premeditation.
Exactly. It shows that he knew what he was doing, that it wasn't just some impulsive thing.
Yeah, and then there's the kill kit his parents found.
Seal kit.
Yeah, like hammers, shovels, knives, duct tape, a saw, all this stuff just, lying around.
Oh, wow. That's not something you just happen to have.
Right. It was clearly put together for a specific purpose.
And a kill kit is almost always a sign of premeditation.
Right. It means he's been thinking about doing something like this for a while, and he actually took steps to prepare for it.
Yeah, that's not good for the defense.
Not at all. So we've been talking a lot about Brian, but what about Warren Barnes, the victim in all of this?
Right. He wasn't just some random homeless guy.
Exactly. I mean, he was part of the community. People in Grand Junction knew him. They liked him.
What was he like?
Well, everyone says he was peaceful, a hard worker. He liked to read, and he'd help out at local businesses sometimes.
So he was a good guy.
Yeah. By all accounts, he was, and his murder really hit the community hard. They held vigils, shared stories about him, raised money to help other homeless people.
It's good to hear that they rallied around him like that, showed that his life mattered.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure he wasn't forgotten, that he was more than just, a homeless guy.
It's a good reminder that everyone has a story.
Yeah.
So this whole question of Brian's mental state, that's really at the heart of this case, right?
Totally. I mean, was it premeditation or was it mental illness?
Or maybe a combination of both.
Could be. To really understand, we need to dig into Brian's past a bit. His history of mental health issues and what his behavior was like before all this happened.
Yeah, like was there anything that could have predicted this? Any warning signs that were missed?
Exactly. So we know Brian had been diagnosed with depression and ADHD, and he was also on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, and those are all conditions that can come with, their own set of challenges.
Right.
And it's important to really think about how those diagnoses might have played a role in what happened. But,
Right. Yeah.
we have to be careful not to overgeneralize or just assume that everyone with those diagnoses is,
That's going to be violent.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
mental illness is complex. It's different for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't just say, oh, he has depression, therefore.
Yeah.
you know.
Right, exactly.
So that's where the expert testimony becomes so important.
For sure.
You know, both sides are going to bring in their psychiatrists and psychologists to try to explain Brian's mental state.
Yeah, they'll look at his history, his behavior leading up to the murder, what he said during the confession, you know, the whole picture.
And they'll be looking for any signs of like psychosis or delusions, anything that suggests he didn't understand what he was doing.
Right. Or that he couldn't control his actions. That's a key point.
So the trial itself was a really big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it got national attention. The courtroom was packed every day.
I bet. I mean, a case like this, it just grabs you.
It really does. And, you know, it really seemed to hit a nerve in the community.
Because of the mental health aspect.
Yeah, partly. I mean, you've got this young guy who seems to have just thrown his life away.
Right.
And then you've got this well-liked guy, Warren, who's just gone.
Yeah, and then this whole debate about, like, is Brian responsible for his actions or was it his mental illness?
Right. It's a tough question.
It is.
So the prosecution, they really focused on the premeditation angle.
Yeah, makes sense.
They brought up the internet searches, you know, how he looked up fatal neck wounds, the kill kit, the fact that he chose Warren specifically because he was homeless.
Right. They wanted to show that he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, and they also pointed to how calm Brian was during the confession.
Yeah, that's going to hurt the defense for sure.
I mean, it does make it seem like he wasn't completely out of it or anything.
Right, like he was aware of what he'd done.
But the defense, they painted a totally different picture of Brian.
Okay, how so?
They said his mental health issues, especially the autism, made it hard for him to, process emotions and understand social cues.
Okay. Yeah, that can definitely be a challenge for people on the spectrum.
And they argued that this whole fixation on killing, it wasn't out of, malice or anything.
More like a morbid curiosity.
Yeah, like something he couldn't control.
Did they talk about his past at all, like his childhood or anything?
Oh, yeah. They brought up times when he'd hurt himself, how he was isolated, had trouble making friends.
They were trying to show that he was a troubled kid.
Yeah, exactly. That this wasn't just some, evil monster, but a kid who needed help.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful moments of the whole trial was when Brian's mom testified.
Oh, wow. What did she say?
She talked about all the struggles he'd had, how hard it was for him to fit in, how guilty she felt for not seeing the warning signs.
That's heartbreaking. I mean, can you imagine being in her shoes?
No, it's just an awful situation all around.
It is.
But it did make you think about Brian differently, as a person.
Yeah, not just as a defendant.
Right.
So what was the verdict?
Guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder.
Wow.
The jury didn't buy the insanity defense.
So they felt like he was responsible for his actions, even with the mental health issues.
Exactly. And he got sentenced to life without parole, plus another 12 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation, right? Because you want to hold people accountable for their actions, but you also have to consider the mental health aspect.
Right, it's a balancing act.
And the community was pretty divided about the verdict. Some people felt like justice was served. Others thought it was too harsh.
Yeah, it's a case that really makes you think about mental health, about the justice system, about how we deal with these kinds of situations.
Definitely. And even though the trial is over, the impact of what happened is still felt in Grand Junction.
Oh, I'm sure.
Warren Barnes, he's remembered as a good guy, someone who was taken too soon.
And Brian.
He's in prison now, and he'll be there for the rest of his life. It's just a really sad story all around.
It is. It makes you wonder what we can do to prevent stuff like this from happening again.
Yeah, like how can we better understand and address mental health issues, not just in the legal system, but everywhere.
Right, in our schools, our families, our communities.
Yeah, and how can we be more supportive of people who are struggling, make sure they get the help they need?
That's a good question, and I think it's one we all need to be thinking about.
I agree. Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive into the Warren Barnes case. It's been a heavy one.
Yeah, it has.
But I think it's important to talk about these things, even when they're tough.
Definitely.
And hopefully it'll get people thinking about how we can do better, as a society.
I hope so too.
Thanks again for listening.